Hey, what's up everyone? Back with another Planeswalker review. Today we're doing Kaito, Cunning Infiltrator. Make sure to like and subscribe if you're into these Planeswalker reviews. Also, thank you Webcore for sending me Planeswalkers as usual and giving me a chance to review them objectively and giving you the honest breakdown on them. So, this is the first mono blue Kaito we've gotten, and he brings something interesting to mono blue. So we'll get into that here. Let's break down his stats. 95 hit points, which is really not good. I feel like mono color walkers should get the benefit of having higher health point totals if we're talking about game balance, because they are usually hindered in different ways by not being able to use all the cards available to other planeswalkers. So I feel like having higher hit points should be some way to mitigate that imbalance there. But I don't know. It's too bad because under 100 hit points in this stage of the meta and just the way power has been ramping in the game over the years, anything under 100 is just really not cutting it anymore. I mean, you can get by with it, but you're always going to be uncomfortable when you take like 30 or more damage. You're already starting to think, uh-oh, what do I need to do here to make sure I don't lose? So I don't like that. What I do like, though, are these mana bonuses. They are incredible. You get a +7 on blue, so you could really go in on blue mana generation by using lands, Cryptex, Leyline of the Guild Pack, things like that, and even ambiguity and other cards like that just create a lot of blue gems to really take advantage of that mana bonus. And then you also get +3 on black and +3 on red. So he's got a very similar mana spread to somebody like a Johnny Invigorate Leadership, actually. So that's pretty cool. But also a Johnny Invigorate Leadership has 130 hit points. So you see what I mean? The mana bonus is -2 on green and white. That's a bit of a tough one. Depending on the type of game you end up playing, if your opponent is flooding the board with green gems or white gems, then it makes it a little harder to get going again. And with that low hit point total, then you're at a disadvantage there. So really got to make sure to load up on conversion that will benefit you so that you can get a fast start, set up your defenses, and win that way. And the cool thing about this Planeswalker, though, that we'll get into when we talk about abilities, is that you can totally go creatureless with them and rely on tokens and other things like that so that you can play them pretty defensively. So let's get into those abilities, actually. Deck limits, too. You should know this. 8 creatures, 6 spells, and 5 supports. Again, one of those things where a Planeswalker like this, you really want to load up on the non-creature cards because you really don't need a lot of creatures in a Planeswalker like this that's relying on creating tokens with his abilities. So I think that was a design mistake. More spells, more supports would have been a lot better for me personally, but I was able to get by without them. But it's just one of those things where sometimes you wonder if they're thinking these things out as much as other people are. Okay, first ability. We got Shadow Calling, ability 1 for 8 loyalty. Discard 2 cards and draw 2 cards. Create 3 ninja tokens. The ninja tokens are as follows. They are a creature, blue, ninja type, 1/1 with unblockable. Not a crazy good ability or anything. It does create tokens for you. Depending on where you're at in the game, discarding 2 cards and drawing 2 of them can be useful sometimes. If you have a way, like if you have something like Alhammer's Archive on the board, you can use that to draw more than 2 cards. Or something that will trigger when you discard. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of one for mono blue. Mono red has Inti Seneschal of the Sun. There might be something like that in mono blue, but I probably should have looked that up before bringing it up. But I'm just thinking out loud about this ability. Not a great one, because if it would be a lot better if the 2 cards you drew got mana, but it's okay. I don't think it's a really good ability at all. So I really just don't use it much. Sabotage and Subterfuge, ability 2, 12 loyalty, destroy the top card of your opponent's library. Just one, huh? Your ninja creatures get +3/+2, and your creatures gain hexproof until the beginning of your next turn. Okay, this is to me by far the worst ability, and really just one of the worst second abilities in the game, if I'm being honest here. For 12 loyalty, you destroy 1 card of your opponent's library. You don't even really get anything out of doing that on its own. You have to tie that to something else. If you're going to be milling that way, you really want more of an impactful mill than that. +3/+2 is not a great buff to begin with, but it's only for ninja creatures, so that will likely be only a couple of your creatures out on the board at one time, unless you're going all in on ninjas. But even so, your creatures, 2 out of 3 of these effects are really kind of negligible. Your creatures gain hexproof until the beginning of your next turn. Hexproof is cool, but it's not even permanent, so you may be delayed targeted removal or something like that against you for a turn. So it's not really doing much. So all of these 3 below average effects add up to one very below average ability, especially for 12 loyalty. If this was the first ability and it costed 3, maybe that's all right. But even so, it's just not one that I want to spend loyalty on, especially when we get to its passive. Fatal Ambush, ability 3, 18 loyalty, create 3 Shinobi Whistle tokens. This one's an interesting one. The Shinobi Whistle is a 1 shield artifact ninja equipment, so it's a little bit fragile because you're only creating 3. So it's going to be a 3 shield support when it hits the board. When your opponent casts a spell or support, deal X damage to your opponent's planeswalker. X is the number of creatures you control, including their reinforcements, then create a ninja token. This is where we start to look at how to build around him. You can go really all in with tokens and make sure so that this ability does a maximum amount of damage. In my normal play, when I'm just building for other things, I don't get a lot of damage out of it, but it's a little something to help ping your opponent down a little bit as you go. And then you're creating a ninja token whenever they cast something like that against you. And that's kind of cool too, because at least you're getting a creature out of it in case you don't have any. It's an okay ability. It's not necessarily going to win games for you, because most players, especially in Platinum, are going to be casting spells that will likely get rid of a lot of things on the board, whether they're casting a removal spell or casting something that ramp into their removal that they have. So it never seems to do a ton for me when I use it. It just helps a little bit. It might, every so often, it will get me to just enough so that I can squeak a win out. But the problem with it for me is that it doesn't really prevent your opponent from casting something that would otherwise really affect you. Instead, it just kind of punishes them a little bit for doing something that will probably give them a little bit more of an advantage. So not amazing, but I think it's his best single ability. But I think his strength really lies in his passive. Loyal Companion passive. When a creature you control deals damage to your opponent's planeswalker, gain 1 loyalty. Then, if you have 20 loyalty or more, create a Himoto Kami of the Spark token. And that Himoto Kami of the Spark is an artifact raccoon ninja creature, 2/4 with menace. This creature can't block, but when it enters the battlefield, it gets +X +X. X is the number of creatures you control, including their reinforcements. So this is why you want to play some creatures or token generators that will make big creature stacks for you, so that when this creature enters the battlefield, it gets pretty big pretty fast. And you'll see it in action in the gameplay testing that I show you here. It was surprisingly easy to get this creature pretty large, so I really enjoyed using it as a way to create a large creature in mono blue, which is not usually its strength. So that is one nice thing that it brings to the table. And it might not be super intuitive, but when a creature you control deals damage to your opponent's planeswalker, as long as you have that 20 loyalty or more, whenever a creature is dealing damage to your opponent, you're creating one of these. And whenever you create one of them, it gets that buff. So if you have double strike on a creature, then it's going to be creating a pretty big creature pretty fast. So there are a couple of creatures in here. One I probably should have tried, but I just wasn't really thinking of it, was Threefold Thunderhulk, because it gets double strike on its own and it's creating tokens. So when that creature double strikes and then the golem tokens hit, you're creating 3 Himotos before the Himoto even gets a chance to attack. And then Himoto attacking will actually create another creature. So this thing can get pretty big pretty fast. So it is very cool in that way. Okay, let's talk about the pros and cons. So first one is he brings creature token strategies to mono blue, which I think is very unique. Great mana gains in blue and solid red-black mana gains as well. And the ability to choose between his abilities and his passive, depending on what you want to do. So you can choose not to use any of his abilities, which is pretty much what I do almost exclusively, and just focus on his passive to grow the Himoto token is very cool to me. And his cons. So I would say the biggest con is that really low health total, his below average loyalty abilities, which, like I said, kind of makes you wonder what the developers were kind of thinking in the design stage of him. So if he had these loyalty abilities and then also lacked a strong passive, he'd be really bad. But I think his mana gains and his passive ability bring enough to the table that it makes him a fairly interesting planeswalker. So let me show you what I did to build around his strengths here. Alright, this first deck is all about building up your fairy tokens, and Satoru will trigger off of those fairy tokens being generated for mana and card draw. And it's not necessarily a looping deck, but it has the potential to do a lot of cool things with it in that way. A few different things happening here. It does take 2 masterpieces to really get the most out of it, so keep that in mind. But Una, Queen of the Fae, when you make a blue or black match by swap, exile the top 5 cards of your opponent's library, then create a fairy token for each color among cards in your opponent's exile. Gain mana equal to the number of cards in your opponent's exile. So you can make up to 5 fairies every time you make a blue or black match by swap. So that should create a lot of tokens that when your Himoto hits the board, you'll get a decent stack out of them. So what I like to do is when I get enough loyalty, I replace this creature Una with the Himoto token and then use the fairy stack to keep growing that Himoto token. Satoru, when a creature enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Then if that card has plot, that card gains half its mana rounded down. Otherwise, gain 4 mana. So the only card in here with plotted is Lock and Load, which I never even used the plotted thing, but it is a card that has plot. So it will come into your hand with half its mana. But for everything else, you just gain 4 mana for drawing when Satoru is triggered. So really good creature draw and mana generation engine in this deck. Whenever you create a ninja token, a Himoto token, or a fairy token, this guy is going to be triggering. The Knowledge is Power is really awesome in this deck because you're going to be drawing with Satoru. So you're going to be reinforcing each creature you control until end of turn and gaining 2 mana. So that means when that Himoto hits the board, you're going to get extra power off of it because of the reinforcements you're going to be making that turn. So it just kind of helps to make everything a little bit stronger in this deck. And then everything else in here is kind of straightforward. I like Inexorable Tide in here because when you cast a card, Proliferate and Escalate, and if you remember, when you proliferate, you gain 1 loyalty. So when you're going to be using this card to gain more loyalty to get to that Himoto token faster, and therefore making it quick. And so that'll get the raccoon on the board quickly and making it grow fast. Mystical Teachings is great because you just get to fetch one of these cards here like Asinine Antics or Lock and Load. And Asinine Antics is probably not a card you're seeing much, but it is kind of an interesting card because opposing creatures gain Cursed Roll. If this card was cast during your turn, gain 3 mana. So what makes this card interesting right now is if they're playing a bunch of big creatures, they're going to be 1/1s on the next turn. It's not going to do much for you if you're playing against a lot of token creatures, but if you're running into like large green creatures, making them 1/1s really slows down your opponent's ability to hurt you much. So it's a pretty cool card. It might not be enough to rely on, but it will gain you some time to get your stuff off the ground. Sugarcoat is a nice creature removal spell disguised as a support. So it's nice to have this in the deck so that you reduce the amount of choices that you get for casting Mystical Teachings. Ambiguity is great in here because it's going to be creating blue gems for you to match. And if you cast Asinine Antics, it's going to reduce the power of the creatures on your opponent's side. So Ambiguity is going to make Ambiguity easier to take the creatures out if you need to. So that's another way of removing a creature. This deck lacks support removal. So if you want to try and put that in there instead of something like Sugarcoat, that's also an option. Ambiguity, if you really don't want it or don't have it. Demolition Field is a good thing in there. Demolition is a good card to put in there as well. So yeah, it's really just about the synergy between SatorOona and the raccoon that makes this deck really go. With Knowledge is Power in there to supercharge things, and Inexorable Tide to help make things go a little faster. So hope you like that deck in action, and let's move on to the next one. Okay, this one is Legacy. I don't do a lot of Legacy showcases in my reviews because just the pool of cards is just so much larger, so it makes it harder for people, I think, to build them. But this one is a peasant build, so hopefully you have a lot of these cards available to you. It's all about wizard class. It's somewhat of a wizard class looping deck. If you're a bit newer to the game, this is definitely a chase card for Legacy because it's an uncommon, and now that you can craft specific Legacy sets, it makes it a little bit easier to target as a newer player. But basically, when you draw a card, if you have 5 or more cards in your hand, each spell card in your hand gains 3 mana. When this card's level becomes 5, draw a card. If that card is a spell card, copy it. So basically, this card is great when you're drawing, which we're going to be doing a lot with Satoru and Ovika together. And the rest of your spells are going to be gaining mana every time you draw a card. So that's pretty amazing. We got Cut Your Losses. The card I missed the most in Standard. Converting 10 gems to blue is going to be great with this Planeswalker because he relies so much on blue gem matches. Eureka Moment is going to be converting 4 gems to your Planeswalker's colors too, so that's another way of creating blue matches there. Broker's Charm is a nice removal spell along with Sugarcoat. Johan's Stopgap, another great removal spell, and it doesn't hurt the loop. It will auto cast. Relic's Roar is going to be our win con here. You just toss this on the goblins or even onto your Himoto token and be able to do a lot of damage there. Ovika is the one that's going to be creating goblin tokens whenever you cast a spell or even a support. So it's a good one to have in this deck. The only thing is it's 25 mana cost, which is a lot, but hopefully with the other things in your deck, it won't be that hard to hard cast him. But that is one of the weaknesses of this deck. Because we don't have Judith, because she is red and black, we had to go with Ovika because it has blue. So if you could think of another token generator that you like more than this one, feel free. It's just the one that I thought of because it makes hasty goblins whenever you cast a spell or support. So you can win on the same turn that you start the loop sometimes. So it's really the only bottleneck in this deck. But if you want to think of something else, such as I believe there is a blue creature that creates bird tokens. Okay, here we go. When you cast a spell card, create a soldier token. It's going to be a lot slower because you're only creating one at a time, whereas Ovika can make a ton of them. When you cast a spell support token, this has a cap, so it's probably not as good. This one has a cap of 5 per turn. So there are some budget versions of that creature, but Ovika is going to be the best one, I think. So that is the basic strategy behind this deck here. So it's basically kind of a newer version of a wizard class loop with Satoru, which is a really good card to pair with them. And the rest of this stuff is just meant to keep that loop going, or with Talent of the Telepath, helping to grab the pieces you need to get the loop going. So I have one last deck to share with you here, which is a lot different than what I've shown you here so far. This last deck here, I'm calling Aikido, even though he is a ninja, so he should be using ninjutsu, but Aikido because we are using the opponent's cards against him. So there's a lot of cards in here. I wanted to just use some of the best cards in Standard for stealing your opponent's cards from them. So first we got Confiscate, which is a new masterpiece. If you control 2 or less creatures, gain control of target opposing creatures. Then if you control 1 or less creatures, gain control of each opposing creature in Vanguard supports with base cost of 18 or less. It's a 9 cost spell, so it's one to use in the beginning. Great for when your opponent gets a fast start on you and you can steal like their Rakdos or something away from them and start to pick away any supports that they might be playing against you and all that. So this card is situationally very good. And we got Lock and Load to just help get things moving as you go. Commodore Guff for gaining mana from all of your supports that you'll be putting on the board. There's a lot of ways to go with this deck here. So Commodore Guff was just one that I thought would be a good one because it can generate a lot of mana for you. Stolen Goods. Create a copy of all non-token supports on the board under your control, then return all opposing non-token cards to their owner's hand. So this means non-token supports and creatures get sent back to your opponent's hand, and if there's no room in their hand, they get destroyed. So this can really switch the tempo of a game in your favor. So really cool card. It's definitely wrecked me a couple times before, and it's helped me out when I've played it. Kidnap, one of the best creature steal cards right now in Standard. At the beginning of your turn, gain control of the first opposing creature until the beginning of your next turn. So that's another way to take advantage of the creatures on your opponent's side and use them against them. Cryptex, just really good for creating blue gems to match. Mystical Teachings is going to grab us one of the spells that we want. Villainous Wealth is probably the best card steal card in the game, or at least in standard. At the beginning of your turn, fetch the first 2 cards from your opponent's library, and those cards gain full mana. So depending on the strength of the opponent you're facing, this card can really make things difficult on your opponent, because you're just going to be using all the cards they play against them for free every turn, whereas they'll have to work to get to the cards that they want to get to. So while you're stealing all of their stuff away from them, this is going to make it hard for them to come back from it. So really strong tempo shifter. Steam Core Scholar is in here mainly to gain loyalty for us so that we can get to our Himoto token quicker. So there isn't a lot of just built-in draw into this deck, but you can kind of spam that first ability a couple times to get the loyalty up. But really you want to save your loyalty to get to the Raccoon token, and this card will help you get there. And then Flare of Denial is in here because if this card is in your hand and doesn't have full mana, you may destroy a target non-token creature you control. If you do, this card gains full mana. So we'll be using Kidnap or anything like that we steal from our opponent and fuel this card with it. And it serves as extra removal. So you could drain all the mana from the first 2 cards in your opponent's hand and gain 2 mana when you cast it. That part of it is relatively negligible. The draining is pretty cool sometimes, but it's really just there as extra removal for your opponent's creatures. This deck can be very fun. It can win really fast, but sometimes, depending on your opponent and just how long it takes to set up, it can also kind of fail on you. So not the most competitive deck, but it is really fun to play. So I'm showing you here the battles where it went really well, but there are times where it won't. So just a heads up for you there. All right, let's get into grades. All right, as always, we got to start with max hit points. At 95, that's just really bad. It's not really cutting it for me anymore. So pretty straightforward there. Got to give it a C-. Anything under 95 is going to get a D or worse. So that's where we're at with the max HP. The mana spread, however, is really good for me. The -2 on green and white can sometimes get you into trouble, but hasn't been that big of a deal for me. You really have to make sure that you have some gem conversion in here to make sure that it goes well for you in that regard, but I think it's pretty good. So I'm giving it an A. Ability 1, just like all of his abilities, I found them very ineffective. I just don't really like discarding 2 cards from my hand and then not getting any real benefit from it. It's just really situational to have this actually be something good for you. The 3 ninjas that you create are, I guess, going to synergize with your Himoto token and any other ninjas you're playing. So it's not doing much for you on its own. So I'm giving it a D, unfortunately. I just don't really like this type of ability that makes you discard your cards and not gain much from it. Ability 2, probably even worse. I just think that all these effects on their own are really below average, and it doesn't even really matter that it's 3 of them together. I still think it's not a good ability. I just really never use it. So I'm giving it also a D. Ability 3 is situationally pretty good. One of the knocks against it too is that you're saving loyalty to create the raccoon token. So I'm just not using his abilities that much in general, but once I have the Himoto token down and at a decent size, then this ability is okay to help move things forward in terms of getting closer to a win. But other than that, it's just not doing a whole lot for you. It does a little less than you expect it to do. So I'm giving it a C+. It's kind of cool to create those ninja tokens that will help to synergize with the rest of your strategy going on. Like especially with Satoru, it will trigger on their turn when they create a ninja token for you. So that's kind of cool, but still pretty average third ability. Not great. Passive ability is very cool. It's pretty much what I based all my decks and stuff around for the most part, except for the Aikido one. Though once you get everything on the board, then the passive ability can, however, even if it's stealing stuff from your opponent's side and putting it into your side of the battlefield, then all of your opponent's cards can help you fuel his raccoon token. So I really like the raccoon token. I think it gets pretty big pretty quickly, and it makes for a fun and unique win con. So I'm giving it an A. Versatility, I didn't find him to be super versatile. I think he's really kind of meant to be played in a certain way. I think his strengths bring you to trying to use ninjas and stuff, but really more broadly, it's trying to get you to use a lot of creature tokens. So he does have kind of a fixed identity, which is not usually my thing. I like planeswalkers to be useful in many situations and not be such a niche type of planeswalker. So he's getting a B in versatility because I do like his mana spread. So that will allow you to do some things with the decks that you may shy away from with other planeswalkers. Card utility, as long as you're playing a lot of tokens, I think that the synergy between his passive and creature token generators is very unique and can be pretty fun. However, if you don't want to do anything like that with him and just want to take advantage of the mana spread, he's a little bit less useful, but you can still get enough out of him to maybe just use him to play high cost cards. So he's kind of in the middle there. I'm giving him a C in terms of card utility. And then fun, if you lean into his abilities and just use him as a blue creature token generator, he's pretty fun in that way. But the fun is also hampered by that really low max hit point total and his abilities not really doing a lot for you other than his passive. So I'm still giving him a B because I think you can have fun when you lean into his strengths. So what does that lead us to? We have a lot of going up and down in terms of what I like and what I really don't like. So my final grade for him is going to be a C. Pretty average overall. You're probably not going to use him for a lot of events, especially ranked PvP, because that max hit point total really brings him down. His abilities not doing a lot for you. It means that you probably aren't going to want to use him in events where you get objective points based on using loyalty abilities. But beyond that, he's just kind of a fun planeswalker to just kind of toy around with. He'd probably be one that I would wait until next year to pick up for crystals on sale. For 200 crystals or whatever it is, like 236 if you're not VIP, he's worth messing around with, but I don't think I would buy him for cash unless I'm just somebody who prefers to support the game in that way. There are people who just buy the planeswalkers because that's their way of supporting the game. Doesn't even really matter if they use him that much or not. So he's all right for that. Beyond that, I don't know. I probably wouldn't pick him up because I just don't think he is that useful of a planeswalker. where you're going to start using him in a lot of events. So there's my honest take on him. I do like him, but there are just way better planeswalkers to spend your resources on. So again, thank you Webcore for being okay with me giving these planeswalkers my unvarnished review. I always try to be as fair and objective with these planeswalkers as I can be. Even though I have a large collection, I've been playing this game for a long time, my opinion is just that. So if other people feel differently about these planeswalkers, I'm always interested in hearing about them. I like when you guys are in the comments giving me either positive reinforcements on my opinions or pushing back with something that I may not have thought of. So there you have it. Looking forward to the next crop of planeswalkers to review. I've been really having a lot of fun with at least one of them. So tune in to see which one that will be. Also, if you're not paying attention to my Chase or Not video series, I've got a bunch of them already recorded. I've been doing them live. Unless it's a card that I've been using for a while, I don't normally have a deck specifically built for each card. So a lot of times you get to see in real time what I think of the card. So it can be a lot of fun. I just start recording whenever I have a chance to and run through training grounds that way. So it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy interacting with people in real time in the chat there. So make sure to turn on your notifications so that you know when I go live and you can watch me and we can interact there. All right. See you there.